Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a year that, well, history often overlooks. Yet one Noel, our source for this, argues it was the absolute worst recorded year, 536 AD. You sent us a fascinating stack of material on this, and our mission today is really to unpack the incredible details of what happened, how it was recorded, and what Noel thinks it might actually mean. It's a unique perspective. Okay, let's get into this. We've got some truly bold claims here, drawing from ancient texts, quite a bit of scientific data, and Noel's own 7,000-year timeline deception thesis. So yeah, this isn't your typical history lesson. Noel basically posits that the historical timeline we've all been given might be, well, intentionally distorted, or at least incomplete. And 536 AD plays this pivotal role in his argument, particularly concerning what he calls a fire judgment event, and interestingly, the onset of a millennial kingdom.
It is fascinating, isn't it, how Noel blends these, seemingly disparate historical records with his own very distinct interpretations. So we'll explore the catastrophic events described by contemporaries, then delve into the pretty compelling scientific evidence, and finally examine how Noel tries to connect all these threads to his larger thesis. We're going from ancient letters all the way to tree rings that, well, whisper secrets.
Okay, so let's start with the big picture, the kind of events that, mainstream historians and the conventional accounts usually discuss. What made 536 AD so devastating? What are the official reports telling us happened?
According to those traditional accounts, it was a truly cataclysmic year for many regions around the world. The sun reportedly lost its brightness,
Yeah.
so much so that people noted midday shadows were just non-existent, and there was this mysterious dry fog or haze. It apparently blanketed the earth for months, really impacting visibility and light. Some records even describe rain as being blood-colored. And maybe the most chilling part, summer just vanished. It essentially turned into a year-round winter.
Wow. A persistent chill. That sounds absolutely dire for survival. What were the immediate consequences? For communities, their food supply.
Precisely. Yeah, this dramatic climate shift led to widespread crop failures. And not just for 1 year, but apparently for 2 consecutive years in many places. And that naturally just spiraled into a worldwide drought, followed by devastating famine, then plague, and just immense death. Historical estimates suggest, untold millions perished, often buried in mass, unmarked graves, just horrible.
And beyond these immediate natural disasters, what was happening on the sort of geopolitical stage at the time?
Well, the Roman Empire, which was already under immense strain, was ravaged by continuous warfare. Cities were wiped out. Civilization, as people had known it, really began to crumble. This period is often cited as the true beginning of what we now call the Dark Ages, an episode that, as Noel puts it, sounds nothing short of biblical in its scope of destruction.
Right. With such an apocalyptic scale of events, you'd really expect a wealth of detailed historical records, wouldn't you? But Noel points out something quite intriguing about how this period came to modern attention.
Yes, this raises an important question. The individual largely credited with bringing the significance of 536 AD to the modern historical forefront was Michael McCormick. He's a distinguished medieval historian at Harvard University. And Noel notes that McCormick, in his extensive research, surprisingly found very few records, specifically detailing the incident from that particular year. Very few.
So given the surprising scarcity of direct records, Noel offers a rather strong speculation, doesn't he? What's his theory about why so little was written down, especially for such a, globally impactful event?
Well, from Noel's perspective, if this was truly a worldwide cataclysmic event, the sheer scarcity of contemporary records implies something more profound than just, mere oversight. He speculates these records might have been scrubbed, deliberately suppressed. Now, he's quick to clarify that McCormick himself never suggested this, but for Noel, the accounts are just so few and far between that this conclusion, in his view, is almost unavoidable. And it leads Noel to ponder why, particularly in places like the Eastern Roman Empire, where, some might have been actively anticipating the arrival of the Messiah's kingdom, why no one seemed to think this dramatic turn of weather and fortune was worth scribbling down, other than what he refers to as the news as recorded for us in the Jesuit history books. Noel believes these offer only their version of events, hinting at a kind of controlled narrative.
Despite the scarcity, Noel did manage to unearth 2 key contemporary sources that shed some light on 536 AD. Let's dive into the first one. Cassiodorus. Who was this historical figure?
Right, Cassiodorus, or Magnus Aurelius Cassiodorus Senator, to give him his full name. He was a prominent figure, a Christian, a Roman statesman, a renowned scholar, lived from around 485 to 585 AD. He served in the administration of Theodoric the Great. Though Noel characteristically harbors the suspicion that Cassiodorus might have been an agent of Constantinople, suggesting he represented a particular, perhaps official, viewpoint.
And Noel then takes a brief, but you mentioned significant detour to discuss Theodoric the Great, Cassiodorus' patron. How does Theodoric factor into Noel's broader historical interpretation here?
It's an interesting point Noel makes. He notes Theodoric was king of Italia from 493 to 526. And while he used the title Rex King, his subjects apparently often called him Augustus, which suggests an imperial sort of stature. Crucially, Noel points out, Theodoric was a patrician of the Eastern Roman Empire. He actually received Western imperial regalia from Constantinople in 497. For Noel, this suggests Theodoric was effectively a client king and emperor of Constantinople, which implies, according to Noel, that the Eastern and Western Roman empires might not have been as neatly divided as conventional history often portrays. It hints at a more unified, maybe centrally controlled power structure. Noel also highlights the sort of murky succession after Theodoric. His heir Athalaric died in 534. Then Amalasuentha was deposed and killed that same year. And then Theodahad was, as Noel puts it, mysteriously taken out in 536, right in the middle of all this.
That context from Noel's perspective is, yeah, fascinating. Okay, so returning to Cassiodorus' letter, what specific details did he provide? You said they paint a vivid picture of 536 AD.
Oh, incredibly vivid. Noel located this specific letter, Book 12, Letter 25, addressed by Cassiodorus to his deputy Ambrosius. In it, Cassiodorus writes that men are alarmed, and naturally alarmed, at the extraordinary signs in the heavens. Pretty direct. He meticulously describes the sun as having lost his wonted light, appearing, get this, of bluish color. Yeah. He notes that at noon, no shadows of our bodies were visible, and the mighty vigor of his heat wasted into feebleness. What he initially describes as maybe a transitory eclipse was actually prolonged through a whole year. Even the moon, when it was full, was apparently empty of her natural splendor. The whole year's course, he wrote, was strange. A winter without storms, a spring without mildness, and a summer without heat.
Just completely out of whack.
Totally. He highlighted prolonged frost and unseasonable drought, saying the seasons seemed to be all jumbled up together, and the earth yielded very little. Cassiodorus specifically mentioned hardened apples and the soured old age of the grape cluster, really signifying widespread agricultural failure.
Those are incredibly specific, dire observations from Cassiodorus. What did he think was causing these dramatic celestial and atmospheric changes? Did he offer an explanation?
He did, actually. He attributes it to the middle air, what he calls the great inane, being somehow thickened by the rigor of snow and rarefied by the beams of the sun. That's a bit archaic sounding now, obviously. He theorizes that when alien elements are blended with it, this air is kind of stretched like a hide across the sky, preventing heavenly bodies from appearing in their true colors or their warmth from penetrating properly. He acknowledges this can happen temporarily with, normal cloudy weather, but its extraordinary prolongation was what caused the disastrous effects he was seeing.
Okay, so he had a sort of proto-scientific explanation. What does Noel make of that, particularly given his skepticism about these official narratives?
Well, Noel really highlights something interesting. Cassiodorus notably begins and ends his letter by explicitly stating that these signs should not be construed as an omen of divine wrath.
Ah, interesting. He's preempting that interpretation.
Exactly. Noel interprets this as Cassiodorus writing, for the exclusive purpose of fact-checking those who think the signs in the heaven had anything to do with divine judgment. Noel sees Cassiodorus acting almost like a, quote, spokesman for the ministry of truth. He even wonders, sort of rhetorically, if Cassiodorus would deny the 9th plague of Mizraim, the biblical plague of darkness, was divine judgment. Noel clearly believes Cassiodorus was consciously going up against a current of apocalypse writers of his time, trying to provide a natural, non-supernatural explanation.
Right. Okay, moving to the second detailed historical record Noel found, we have the Byzantine historian Procopius. What does he add to our understanding of 536?
Procopius, yeah. Born somewhere between 490 and 507 AD. He was a notable Byzantine scholar, took part in military expeditions, and famously described the Great Plague of 542 from Constantinople. So he was there for some major events. His account largely corroborates Cassiodorus's. He describes the sun during this year, giving forth its light without brightness like the moon. He said it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, with beams that were not clear nor such as it is accustomed to shed. Very similar language.
And he directly connects these environmental changes to a period of intense human suffering and strife, too, doesn't he?
He does, very directly. Procopius states that from the time when this thing happened, men were free neither from war nor pestilence nor any other thing leading to death. And he places this specifically during the 10th year of Justinian's reign, which, as Noel points out, leads us directly back to 536 and 537 AD. So the timing fits perfectly.
So we have another source, backing up the same bizarre atmospheric conditions and widespread hardship. Yet, Noel clearly sees something more significant here than just, a coincidence of natural phenomena and human conflict.
Indeed. While an endless night and winter might seem kind of counterintuitive for waging war effectively, Noel asserts that it was indeed a divine appointment, whatever these guys will tell you.
Yeah.
He's reinforcing his view that these events were divinely orchestrated, not just random natural disasters coinciding with human troubles.
Okay, so Noel found the historical paperwork for 536 AD quite thin, as we discussed. Just these two detailed records, both primarily from Italia. But this didn't deter McCormick, the historian. He, as Noel says, went to another source, one where trees do talk. What exactly does Noel mean by that? What are we talking about here?
This is where the science really steps in, and it gets quite fascinating. McCormick, suspecting this was something far bigger than just a localized Italian event, turned to dendrochronology.
Tree rings.
Exactly. The science of analyzing tree rings. Trees add a new layer of growth each year, forming these rings that act as a remarkable kind of health report, reflecting the environmental conditions they live through.
And what did these silent witnesses, the trees, reveal about 536 AD? Was it just Italy or?
Oh, the findings are striking and global. Samples collected from all over Sweden, Siberia, China, Chile, California, they all corroborate a consistent pattern. 536 AD was, as Noel quotes, the worst recorded year in his story. And Noel uses that term, his story, deliberately, right?
Yeah.
Implying a narrative-shaped or controlled, not just objective history.
Right.
Mike Bailey, who's a leading dendrochronologist, found abnormally low growth in Irish oaks for that year. In fact, the rings for 536 were apparently often too narrow to point to, almost invisible in some samples. And a Siberian pine from Mongolia showed larger cells in 536, which testify to frost damage after a dramatic drop in temperature. It indicates a sudden, severe global cooling event, a worldwide ice age, as Noel describes it based on this data.
Wow. So a worldwide ice age, this persistent, dry fog blocking the sun, it all points compellingly to some kind of massive global event. What are the leading scientific explanations now for this mystery fog and this sudden climatic shift?
Well, scientists have put forward several theories over the years. The New York Times, back in a 1983 article, first speculated it was the result of a massive volcanic eruption. That's been a leading theory. Initially, an Icelandic volcano was suspected, but others, like Rabaul in Papua New Guinea or Tierra Blanca Joven in El Salvador, have also been suggested as potential culprits. Beyond volcanoes, some have speculated maybe a comet impact could have thrown up that much dust and aerosols.
And Noel specifically mentions David Keyes, an English archaeologist, and his theory about the Indonesian volcano Krakatoa. What was Keyes' hypothesis there?
Right, David Keyes. He was so convinced Krakatoa was the perpetrator, largely based on information he interpreted from the Javanese Book of Kings, that he actually argued to change its commonly accepted eruption date from 416 AD way forward to 535 AD, specifically to align with his theory about the 536 dimming.
That's a bold move, changing an eruption date. But what does Noel say about the accuracy or, the stability of these proposed dates for the various volcanic events? Is it settled?
Not really, and Noel points that out. The dating of these ancient eruptions is far from definitive, and it keeps shifting with new research. Rabaul, for instance, is now thought by some researchers to have erupted maybe in the 7th century, not the 6th, and the El Salvador eruption. More recent ice core samples date it to the early 5th century. For Noel, this is kind of another case where everyone is slapping for a light switch in the dark, confused as hell. He suggests researchers are struggling to find a definitive explanation that fits neatly within the established historical framework.
So is there any scientific consensus or perhaps highly certain evidence regarding the actual cause of this global atmospheric phenomenon? Anything solid?
The most certain and compelling evidence, scientifically speaking, really comes from ice core analysis, from Greenland and Antarctica. There was a pivotal 2015 study, for instance, that dated sulfate deposits, a key marker for volcanic eruptions, and also a cryptotephra layer.
Cryptotephra?
Yeah, it's basically non-visible volcanic ash particles, microscopic stuff. They dated these layers in the ice to the exact year 536 AD.
Okay, that's specific.
Very specific. And furthermore, a separate, really monumental study used detailed geochemical analysis of these cryptotephras to distinguish at least 3 synchronous eruptive events, all in North America, dating to 536. One of these correlates with the Mono Inyo craters in northeast California. The other two likely originated from the Aleutian Islands in Alaska and the northern Cordilleran volcanic province up in the Pacific Northwest. So multiple near-simultaneous volcanic eruptions seem to be the most robust scientific explanation we have right now for the scale and duration of the 536 event.
Okay, so we have multiple volcanic eruptions confirmed by ice cores, backed up by the ancient tree rings, all pointing to 536 AD as this globally significant, devastating year. But Noel, as we've discussed, he goes a step further in his interpretation, doesn't he?
Yes, absolutely. If we connect this back to the bigger picture Noel is painting, he believes that the horse blinders are the nagging problem. He speculates that 536 AD, while acknowledged as the worst year in his story, was actually likely way, way worse than what these researchers will admit into their framework. He suggests a deliberate downplaying or perhaps a misinterpretation of its true severity and its implications.
And this brings us right back to his initial thesis about that fire judgment event and how he integrates this cataclysm into his larger, non-conventional historical narrative.
Exactly. Noel often reminds his readers of the melted cities across our realm, which he sees as physical evidence of some kind of past fiery destruction on a massive scale. He states he's of the opinion that the heavens and the earth were stored up for fire, being unleashed on the day of judgment to the destruction of the unrighteous. He's quoting Kepha there, or Peter, as he's known in the New Testament. So for Noel, 536 AD isn't just a really bad string of volcanic eruptions and a climate disaster. It's a profound moment of divine intervention, judgment.
So the period often referred to as the Dark Ages isn't dark in the traditional sense of, lost knowledge or decline for Noel. He sees it fundamentally differently.
Fundamentally differently, yes. Noel believes that the Dark Ages, wait, scratch that. He says the Millennial Kingdom of Yahushua HaMashiach followed in its wake. He suggests that this cataclysm actually paved the way for what he sees as a period of divine rule, a millennial kingdom, a concept you find in various prophetic texts. He proposes that the calendar dates we rely on, the whole chronology, may very likely be the clever reworking of Jesuits and Benedictine monks. He questions the fake news of history, as he puts it, meaning history as a deliberately misrepresented account.
Right.
And this is why he was initially, as he said, soft on these calendar dates from the very beginning of his research, but he became firm on 536 because, as he says, trees do talk. They offer this undeniable physical record that, in his view, transcends human bias or manipulation.
We've just taken a really deep dive into 536 AD, a year of, profound mystery and global impact, seen through Noel's incredible and pretty provocative lens. From those faint historical whispers recorded by Cassiodorus and Procopius, all the way to the unwavering testimony of ancient tree rings and the evidence locked in ice core samples. This was truly a period where the world seemed to just hold its breath.
And it does raise an important question, doesn't it? If the physical evidence for such a dramatic global event is so compelling, and those contemporary accounts, though few, are so vivid, what other Dark Ages, or maybe seemingly obscure historical periods, might actually conceal a very different narrative, perhaps one just waiting for us to connect the dots differently and maybe look beyond the conventionally accepted story?
As Noel suggests, maybe the greatest cover-up isn't just about what happened, but about how history itself is presented and interpreted. What stands out to you from this deep dive? Perhaps it's a provocation, maybe, to reconsider the narratives we've always accepted and to seek out those silent witnesses, like the trees that might just tell a different tale. Until next time, keep digging.